Hey, what's up everyone? Welcome back to another shop video, which this time I think you guys are really gonna enjoy this one. Just a quick backstory. So I'm working on the 80 series. Boop. I've been collecting parts, I don't know, 6 months plus. Last summer, I started doing this, maybe around May. And right now it is the end of January 2022. So I finally got almost all my parts, so I decided to go ahead and get started on lifting my 80. So this is a 1997 FZJ80 Toyota Land Cruiser, and it had bone stock suspension on it from the factory, which means what, 25 years old. It was about this high off its bump stops. And what I found was, because I've already done part of this and I've already recorded it, I'm putting a 3-inch lift on it, and what I found was it was sagging 1 inch, right? So I did a measurement before and I did a measurement after, and it lifted it 4 inches. That's 1 inch of sag on the factory and then the 3 that I added. So pretty good. I really didn't want it to be like come out as like 5 or 6 inches, because my goal is not to have this thing sky high, because I actually off-road these things. It's not just for looks, right? It's for function. And the higher you go, the more dangerous it is, or not necessarily dangerous, but you have to go slower, it's sketchier. I've already did the back. This video is going to be about the back. I've already recorded it, and I don't know if you can tell from here, but it's, you know, it's sitting like this because there's a 3-inch lift in front and in back and nothing in the front. What I'm doing right now is I'm getting ready to turn it around, back it out, turn it around, back it in, so I can work on it from here. Problem is, look at this. I've had to work in these extremely tight conditions like this. Why? Well, because it's winter time, and I normally work, see, I got my little 2-car garage here, right? Normal. Over on the side of my house, I have a single car garage that sits in the back of the house. And then there's a gate, and I have an area there that I can work behind the gate by my little garage. In the summertime, it's great. In the wintertime, it's in the shade all the time, and it's freezing over there and working on the concrete. So I moved some things around, and I'm working in this garage here. And I've actually had to move one of my toolboxes and my big workbench over here, the one with the vise and everything. So I could, anyway, long story super long, hanging out with my legs, I'm kicking shovels and rakes and bashing into this little trailer here. The rooftop tent on that I never use. So if you're trying to do this by yourself, it's more challenging, but here's the tools you'll need. And I say that because I still have them laid out here. All right, you guys, let's get to this. So I decided to record everything without talking, because I usually talk way too much, and then just do voiceover afterward, because I think I'll be able to explain things a little bit more thorough and get through the video without talking too much. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm only going to be working on one side to show you. Everything I'm doing on one side, I obviously do on the other. First off, I'm dropping the sway bar out. You can look above the drive shaft across here. You can see I've already dropped the sway bar off the other side. Dropped it off this side. I'm going to be removing the sway bar bracket where I'm grabbing onto right here, and because I need a drop bracket for the lift. One really important thing, you see the holes on the frame just above the bracket? There's a large hole and a small hole. You can actually get your penetrating oil, shoot it down inside there, inside the frame, and hit the top of the bolts, because these bolts are threaded into the frame, and these are the bolts you absolutely do not want to break off. There's a fair amount of bolts that go into the frame. The sway bar brackets, the bump stops, some of the brake lines, the emergency brake cable, those brackets, they all go into the frame. So you don't have access. It's not a nut and a bolt. It's a blind hole into the factory, into the factory frame, and I just smashed the camera with the wrench accidentally. So we're going to drop off the sway bar brackets first. All right, next up is going to be the bump stop. Again, these are blind bolts going into the frame. That square hole just above it, you can squirt down in there with penetrating oil. Let that stuff soak before you go after it. You'll hear one of these bolts is pretty tight still, even though I let it soak. This one right here. But what we're going to do is pull off the bump stop. Yeah, you can hear it right there. So pull off the bump stop because it also gets a drop bracket. So sway bar gets a drop. Bump stop gets a drop. Now I'm putting the bump stop back on with its drop bracket that's appropriate for this particular 3-inch lift. This drop bracket is from Delta Vehicle Systems, and the bolts are a little fidgety. Let's just say that. You know, it works good, but you have to hold that spacer in there. You have to hold some washers in there while you align it. So it's a little bit fidgety, but other than that, it's going to do the job. Now the sway bar drop bracket goes on. You know, a lot of people use Never Sees and things like that. Use whatever you like, but definitely put something on your threads when you're going back together with it. I use a kind of a lithium grease. It's a little bit of my own mixture. But this is a Dobinsons drop bracket for the sway bar. You're going to see a pattern of a lot of different brands going into this lift kit, but I think it's going to come together pretty good. So I do like to put a couple things on, like right away. Like this is within the first 10 minutes. I'm already putting new stuff on. So we're going to start getting into kind of the meat and potatoes of this thing. Going to go after the shock. So one thing I just wanted to let people know, if you're trying to do this stuff yourself, obviously just keep your eyes open, look around. But there are a few things that you need to look out for. One of them is that the shocks in the front and the back is what limits the travel. So there's not like limit straps or anything. And it's not the coil springs. It's actually the shocks. Now you can take the shocks out when you jack it up. You'll see that the upper and lower control arms and the Panhard bar kind of binding up, holding it in place. But when you're going at full travel, it's your shocks. The reason I say this is you could take these off and the axle could fall a few inches. So you just need to be careful of what you're doing, as well as support the axle while you're taking these bolts out, because you don't want to be cranking these bolts out under pressure of the axle. So I do have a jack under the axle. The whole back is on jack stands, but I have a jack under the axle so I can control the height of it. And the top shock, I'll show this later on. The top of the shock mount is a plate, and I'm actually removing the plate, and it's going to come out with the shock. So now I got the top shock plate unbolt. The 2 bolts are out of that. I'm just prying off the bottom one. And if you're working on a car as old as mine is, you'll probably find some bushings come apart. Some will stay stuck to the chassis. And what happened here was half of the bottom one stayed on there. So I just pried it off, cleaned it up, and I may not show it, but I'm always cleaning the surfaces before I go back on with new stuff, whether I'm just wiping it off with WD-40 or I'm actually getting a scraper to it, taking off a bunch of grime built up over years and years of off-roading. Now it's time to pull the coil out. So the coil coming out was really easy because, like I had said earlier, this was a very old, from 97 original coil, so it came out no problem. Now going back in with a progressive rate 3-inch lift coil, I had some difficulties. And that ring right there, you're going to reuse that ring on top. And on my particular kit, it also came with like some 5 or 10 mil spacers that go on the driver's side coils front and rear because the Land Cruisers tend to lead to the driver's side. So one thing I wanted to make sure I let you guys know is I disconnected the bracket on the brake line and the bracket on the emergency brake cable, so they're hanging. But right now, if you look in the center, you can see I have that wood underneath. It's getting in my way. The way I solved this, I got that wood out of there. I put a jack on the other side, jacked it up a little bit, and I also used some spring compressors, which no one really likes, but I've got some decent ones, and I don't crank them very far. I only gained myself about 3/4 of an inch, and it was just enough to pry it on. But you can see how the other side's jacked up a little bit. There's a little jack over there, and that helped tilt the axle in my direction. Oh, there we go. All right, so I'm going back together with this now. I've got the Icon shocks here. What I have to do is take the plate from the old ones. And it's not really from the old ones. This is like, so the cool thing about this, so all right, first off, these shocks here, they actually work for the 100 series as well that I have. And in the 100 series, they don't have a plate. You actually have to get up underneath this and unbolt the shock, which is a nightmare. But with the 80 series, you take the plate out and then you can take the shock off the plate. Pretty cool difference. I've seen nightmarish videos about people trying to undo the plate. So what I'm doing is I got the coils in, I got everything in. I should have showed you all that already. Before I button it all up, I'll do like an overview of what I did. And then I've got this here. So these go around here. This goes in a frame hole, and this is what holds the. That's what holds the reservoir. It's right up. I'll show you where it's at, but it's where the lower link connects to the frame. So it's a really interesting build. I've got Slee parts from Slee Off-Road. I've got Icon. I've got Delta. Dobinsons. So Dobinsons was the sway bar drop brackets and the brake proportioning valve bracket. Now I'm going to go ahead and assemble the Icon shocks to the frame plate. Icon came with all new hardware with the bushings and everything, which was really good. I went ahead and marked my plates with an arrow and driver's side, passenger side, which helped me just keep things organized. The reservoir goes forward, so I'm making sure that I actually do the orientation of the bracket, being the slot goes to the outside of the car, and that the outlet of the reservoir is going to be pointing forward. Just trying to think ahead here before I mount it and find out it's backward. But the directions say I only need to expose like 2 or 3 threads above this nylock nut. So the shock installation, it's a little fidgety, and I tell you that top plate, its shape is kind of weird. And when I did the other side first before I did this one, and I thought I had it in backward, even though I had it marked with arrows and everything. It's very, very strange. So the secret or the trick that I did is the hole you can see right here on this side, I started that bolt in and got it almost all the way in. Then I put the bottom in. Then I went back and did the slotted side. I'm pretty sure that's how I did it. It's very fidgety because of the angle. It helps tilt the shocks in the right angle, but putting it on, it seems like it's completely wrong, but it's not. It worked out fine. And again, looking at this frame, to the right is forward, and that's the way the orientation of the remote reservoir is going forward. It's pretty tight. it's pretty tight on that hose, and I'm gonna actually have to get some protection because it leans right against that drop bracket for the sway bar. And I'm gonna put a over hose on it, so it's like a disposable piece that it'll rub through that before it rubs through the actual remote reservoir hose. The one thing I don't have to complete this job is the front Icon shocks. Those are Icon springs, if I didn't mention that earlier. The black springs there are Icon, and the shocks are Icon. And these were the longest lead time, and it's that way with almost every shock manufacturer. So if you're looking to do something, just know that spring, not necessarily the coils, but the shocks are like way, way out. And you see that now you get a better angle inside that coil. That little bump stop that's in there, that's what was really hanging me up trying to get that coil on. So this was shows you what I'm working with. I didn't mention this earlier, but my jack stands only go so high, and this car has so much flex that you can see I'm working literally a 1/4 inch off the ground with the shock, and I just had to go up just a little bit to get it on there, and I just pop it right on with the mallet. No, you're making sure the angle is correct. I'm not trying to force anything. So once I see the angle's right, pop it on with the mallet. But I'm so low to the ground that my dust shield for my brake rotor is literally 1/8 of an inch off the ground, if not touching. And that's because I don't have jack stands that go high enough to where I can droop this axle all the way down. You can see where I'm working at now. It's the hole there is just directly above where the lower control arm mounts to the chassis. And you can see my jack stand location. I actually used 4 jack stands working on both the front and the rear. I would put them in the center where they're supposed to be, and then I'd have some kind of safety ones that sit out at the edges just in case anything happens. So this is the bracket I showed you a little bit earlier, working with the shock. It's got an oblong plate in there, and in the plate it has a little pin. So you use the bolt and the pin to center it up in the hole. And before you tighten it all the way up, you got to put the bands on, tighten them up, then you can actually mount the reservoir after that. It's a little finicky to work with, but once it went together, just like trying to get it started was kind of the hard part. Running that long bolt in there by hand. But the good thing about something like this is no drilling, right? The idea is to stay away from drilling into your frame. Time for the Panhard Bar. So, yeah, this putting a bracket on here, but my camera battery died and I didn't know it. But I do a follow-up and I explain it all. What I'm doing is I'm just checking to make sure there's no undue pressure, like this thing's going to go flying. That's why I'm wiggling things around a little bit. And you can see my disconnected breather line there. That's one thing I didn't mention, was I did disconnect the axle breather line as well. All right, you guys, I'm going to try and cover off some of the stuff maybe that I missed during the installation. So this is definitely one of the things here that the battery ran out. This is the Delta Vehicle Systems bracket. Okay, so instead of getting a adjustable track bar, Panhard bar, whatever they're called, lateral stability bar, you can go with this bracket. And what it does, you can see here, this is the normal factory mounting location. So you figure moving this down to here is going to change the angle of this bar, and also it's going to relocate the axle. So by setting up this bar and moving it up, you're flattening out the bar, which is more ideal, and you don't have to and it recenters. This one recenters it based off of a 3-inch lift, and you don't have to get an adjustable bar. How it mounts is, you can see one bolt goes through the factory, then it puts it up here for this, and then it actually grabs the upper link. So you pull the upper link bolt and it goes around that, relocates there. So that works out pretty good. So one of the other things I didn't record for sure was this. And what this is your brake proportioning valve, and it's a bracket. So you can see that it has been relocated from this position here, where the bracket bolts in, up to this position here, which makes it good for a 3-inch lift. This is a Dobinsons bracket, and it came with a diagram on which holes and the distances and all that stuff. So that should be good. And this is actually the same for not only Toyota Land Cruiser, but for the Nissan Patrols, is what the paperwork said. So I got that done. We got the bracket done. We got the coils done. We got the drop bump stops done. The shocks are in. The drop sway bar brackets are in. Everything's done back here for now, with the exception extending my my breather. Now, I didn't know that it came with an extender, but it only mounts right up here. I don't know if I'm going to run this up like into the engine bay or something, so I'm going to wait on this. I did not do the extended brake line yet. I have it, but I need to turn the car around. So once I turn it around, back it in here and start working on the front, then I can do the 2 front brakes and the 1 rear extended stainless steel brake lines. We'll do that. The other thing, while I was under here, obviously being as old as it is, I saw the upper and lower control arm bushings are pretty worn out. They're cracked and stuff. So down the road, I'll probably be doing upper and lower control arms. But other than that, the back is pretty good to go right now. What I'm going to do now is turn this thing around and get to work on the front.